Many of us don't give Linux a chance, not because we can't figure it out, but because change threatens comfort. My experience with Linux can be communicated in two distinct passages: my expectations and my reality. Like many, I wanted to switch over to Linux for privacy reasons. I expected a convoluted installation experience, annoying mandatory use of the command line, my games not running due to incompatibilities, things constantly breaking that I didn't know how to fix, and my hardware not working in harmony, and the omnipresent threat of making a mistake and deleting my precious data. The reality, however, was quite different. The installation experience was smoother than I realized. I didn't actually need to use the command line for anything, although I did learn that I like having so much control over things. The games I wanted to run all ran on Linux with zero fuss using Steam. Things did break, just like they did in Windows, and my strategies I used in Windows to fix them worked just fine in Linux, like Googling the problem. My hardware, even with an NVIDIA graphics card, worked seamlessly, and as for my data, at the same time I decided to try out Linux, I learned how to use my external hard drives to create backups of my files. There was really no longer a risk of wiping anything. Fearing the unknown isn't so weird. We wouldn't run full speed into a foggy forest. What if we ran into a tree? What is weird, though, is not learning about the unknown that haunts us. If we fear Linux because we don't understand it, how is that fair to ourselves? To break out of this, we must first learn what Linux is and then base our decisions in rational thought. We cannot fear the unknown that is Linux if we understand that it's just the brain of our computer, like Windows. It receives input and creates output. To use an analogy, if we know how to drive a car, even without knowing how to ride a motorcycle, we can still understand that they're both vehicles and will both get us to our destination. This is the same with Windows and Linux. They're very different in shape and size, but are both operating systems that facilitate computing tasks. Typically, being a control freak is a bad thing, but with our computer, it's pretty much a given. To use a computer that won't do what we ask of it is an exercise in futility. However, switching over to Linux is not something that results in us losing control. If anything, we get a lot more control. This doesn't mean that we'll know how to use that control right away, but it's objectively true that Linux locks fewer things down than Windows, meaning ultimately, control over our computer increases. This fear is irrational. It can be so incredibly difficult to overcome a previous negative experience with something. Because of how complicated it used to be to install and configure Linux on modern computers, many of us who have tried to install it in the past and failed have no shot at breaking through that mental barrier anytime soon. However, it's worth noting that while using negative experiences to dissuade us from doing something bad repeatedly is a good thing for survival, it's a bad thing when dealing with botched attempts at picking up new technologies. Why? Because these things are frustrating at times. It's just how they work. Is it really worth writing off Linux just because we tried once and failed? If I tried to install Linux and couldn't make it work, I might feel pretty down. I should have just stuck to Windows. Why did I bother? I knew it was going to be messed up. I'm stupid, and so on and so forth. However, what does it actually matter if we feel dumb because we botched something? Even if we do make a dumb mistake, is there any reason why we should give up entirely instead of trying again? It would be a lot more dumb, in my opinion, to give up than it would be to not try because we're afraid of looking dumb, especially with something as personal as our computers. We've had decades to set up our computers in exactly the way we want. All of our data is in the right spots and the settings are tuned perfectly. The idea of losing all of this to try something new is way too tall of a mountain to summit for most of us. But this one is actually super silly. Why? Because we have the ability to work around this fear so easily. How? Just install Linux on a spare hard drive, or install it next to Windows on the same drive with a dual boot setup. We can then use both operating systems with no threat of losing what we already have. This gives us plenty of time to learn the new system at our own pace. This is how I personally did it. Linux is not magic. We have the ability to switch from ecosystems that no longer suit us. Many of us see the value without even being told, but face internal fears over making such a drastic change in our lives. I'm here to say that it's okay to be afraid of change, but holding ourselves back because we're afraid of one thing or another does nobody any good, especially ourselves. I encourage those who can't quite seem to embrace Linux to search from within and tackle the fear of change head on. I know you can do it, even if you don't yet realize it. Good luck.